Thank you so much, everyone. Matt, are we good? Thank you, Matt. So I'm so excited that you are here and that we have, as you know, this is a different time that we are producing the positions departmental lectures. So it's very exciting that we can share these kinds of conversations with the Core 2 and Core 4 groups. So that's great. So my name is Grace Law, and I'm really, again, appreciative that you could join us today, and in particular, to have our guests. So Positions, as you know, is a series of conversations convened by the department aimed at revealing the positions taken by players on the field of contemporary architecture. The series hopes to unfold the complexity of relations and metaphors to make them explicit, inviting faculty and guests and students to voice where they stand. So today, we're very delighted to introduce to welcome Elli Mosayebi and Christian Inderbitzin. They are actually teaching an option studio with us called Engiadina, Elemental Living. And their careers are characterized by a very close connection between practice, research, and teaching, which is especially wonderful for our community, and we're very excited to have you here. Together with Ron Edelaire in 2004, they founded the Zurich-based architecture practice called Edelaire Mosayebi Inderbitzin, EMI, and you can see that very strongly on their website. Through numerous projects won through competitions, housing and urban design have assumed a very special significance in their work, and is kind of what they're also all about for their studio. The office has won several awards and prizes, including the Swiss Art Award for Anthropomorphic Form in 2019, the Prix Linium 2024 for their school building, and the best gold for the performative house in Zurich. So housing and its current changes are very integral aspects of both their practice and research. So let me just tell you about them individually, because I think that's also a hallmark of the format that we've devised for positions, that each of them, they're talking to each other, and that's unique in this case because they're also partners, but also talking about the formation of their work. So for Elli, from 2012 to 18, Elli was a professor for design and housing at TU Darmstadt, where she conducted a comparative study of post-war European housing. And since 2018, she serves as professor for architecture and design at ETH Zurich. Elli's book, The Renewal of Dwelling European Housing Construction from 1945 to 1975, which was co-edited with Michael Kraus, has received very significant recognition, including the Deutsches Museum Dam, a book award in 2023 that honors outstanding architectural publications. And I actually saw it on several of your desks upstairs, so that's great. Christian studied architecture at the ETH Zurich from 1997 to 2004, completing his studies with projects under Jacques Herzog and Pierre Demeron, who are also, of course, you know, former GSD faculty. He then worked for a short time at Millie Peter Architects in Zurich, and from 2005 to 2010, he was a research assistant at the ETH Studio Basel Institute for Contemporary Cities with professors Roger Diener, Jacques Herzog, Marcel Millie, and Pierre Demeron. Following a lectureship at the Graz University of Technology in 2011, he was a visiting professor at the École Polytechnique Fédérale de Lausanne, EPFL, from 2015 and 16. And then since 2020, he holds a professorship of city and housing at the Karlsruhe Institute of Technology. Christian is the author or co-editor of numerous publications, for example, Cygnus House and Garden, which was Park Books in 2019, among others. So please join me in welcoming Christian and Elli.
Hello.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for this really generous invitation. And actually, we brought some publications that we published together. For example, the Cygnus House that you just mentioned, and we are going to structure our lecture along these topics that we have been working on, but maybe we just start with the first portrait of our office. That's the three of us, Christian and me, you can see us, and the person on the right side is Ron Edelaire, so we are three partners, and yes, so he's equally important and couldn't be here today. So let's go on. We only have 15 minutes. I'm afraid we are going to talk a little bit longer. So the past, the present, and the future, that is actually the task. And that's a really nice task. And we're really looking forward to a nice discussion afterwards with you. I think for us, the past is the garden topic that we brought today with you. It's also reflected in this book, or in these two books actually, Garden and Signa House, but also other publications on garden. Picturesque, for example, was an important one. Then the second topic is going to be the performance, performative architecture, a topic that we've been working on also for several years now, and we managed finally to publish a small booklet, which is also here, the pink one, and it just came out actually last week, so we are really proud to have it here. And the third topic for the future is almost looking back. It's kind of a heritage topic. We just called it maintenance, and we're also going to talk about some projects where renovation and repair is important. So for each topic, 3 projects, but quickly to have time for discussions. So I would like to start with garden as maybe one of the most important topics in our work. And it is important because it is a topic that has been engaged us since our university studies, you could say. So it all started with the cartographic survey of a Renaissance garden, namely the Garden of Bomarzo. The garden is essentially a landscape of ruins, which since its rediscovery in the 1950s by Salvador Dali, who you know, has remained extremely enigmatic and mysterious. It's a beautiful garden, and it's hidden at the foot of the castle of Count Vicino Orsini, close to the city of Rome. Unlike the other gardens of its time, such as the Villa Lante in Banaya, for example, you know it maybe, this garden, which is also called Sacro Bosco, kind of the holy or sacred forest, is not a formalized Renaissance garden with clearly defined spaces, dramaturgically designed pathways, water features, etc. But it is actually a garden that is quite informal and open. It has some remaining sculptures, water basins, and architecture structures, but they appear to be set freely and kind of embedded within a rocked forest landscape. And visitors often find themselves uncertain whether they are encountering a naturally occurring rock formation or a roughly hewn sculpture. It seems as if the forest itself has given birth to its artwork, rather than it being a deliberate human creation. And this is actually a sculpture that we found when we were there as students. It is outside the fenced garden. We were walking there, and suddenly we saw this face appearing in the ground of the forest. And you could see that this magic of not being sure if it's now art or nature appeared there really strongly. So in the naive hope of unraveling the enigma of Bomarzo, the secret of it, we traveled there with other students of ETH, geomatic students, and started to map the garden. So kind of we mapped every detail and produced this map that you can see there. And we thought maybe we would find structures that are hidden. We would maybe see them from above. But then we concluded that the garden's decay, actually, since its abandonment, had not led to its deconstruction. Instead, the ongoing fusion of nature and art had brought it to its ultimate completion. So that's something which we found extremely strong. And starting from that, I think some of the themes of this natural artwork remain very significant to us until today. And we still employ the garden as a kind of a metaphorical category, encompassing the following concepts. For example, the ruin as the architectural form that is closest to architecture. entropy as an artistic device, it's also extremely interesting, or the topic of the open form as described by Umberto Eco, referring to a form that remains open to interpretation and can be appropriated by viewers independently. The idea of a kind of an imagined context, a context that extends the physical and morphological surroundings. That's also very important. So it's not only what you see, but it's also the invisible structures that leave an impact on the context. Another topic, which of course also informed the idea of performance, is the idea of mutability. Let's say the kind of the ever ongoing change. And then not least is also the picturesque that you can also see here in the image of Petwork Pass, another publication. The picturesque as an aesthetic category that places the ugly alongside or in contrast to the beautiful and the sublime. So that was maybe an important starting point for our projects. And now we brought two, and we could also bring more, but we brought two projects that have to do with that. And one of them is Avellana, a really early project that we did already in 2010. And I'm just going to show you some images and maybe what is important here in the urban scheme. As you can see, it is actually a plot that is in the second road. So you can see the long building in the back. It's not situated along the street. And it's situated in an old village center. It's Zurich, but it was actually quite rurally it's a rural context. And what was also important for us, the plot itself was behind a kind of a stately manor building, which is the building in front. Maybe you can show it, Christian. Thank you. Yeah, that one. So when we started, thank you.
So, it's good that I can contribute a little bit to this.
I'm going to change roles afterwards. Don't worry. So when we started the competition, we really liked the fact that we would build a project on this kind of informal slot. And we'll develop this idea of fractures and edges, kind of this idea of subordination, and a project that has a soft wooden facade cladding with different windows and frames, mimicking garden shed buildings. This is a beautiful sketch by Christian, by the way, so that shows like this. Kind of a children's drawing. It's kind of the naivety, randomly grown structures and so on. So we liked very much this idea that we would build a large garden shed behind this stately manor. And also the floor plan should reflect this informality of this garden shed building. So there is open staircases that you already saw. And also a reference to rural housing is that you enter directly into kitchens, you have these open schemes, you walk, and these apartments are quite small. They were meant for elderly people. It's kind of not for families, so they only have one bedroom or maybe two, but most of them only have one bedroom. So you enter directly into a kitchen, and then you kind of go around the corner, and then you have a kind of a living. You always have these windows referring to the outside, so the connection is really close. It's a timber structure, so construction is quite precise, and then you have these really large doors. We love doors, by the way. So you have these large doors that have no lintel, and they open. Some of them have two wings and open in two directions. So then the kind of the ceiling is continuous and gives an impression of a larger apartment, even though they are quite small. The doors have this large wood veneer to create a reference to vernacular architecture again. And then this kind of informality of those two door wings we liked very much. No, it's not a bourgeois house where the door would open exactly symmetrically, but it's asymmetrically and very loose. And in the end, you have also this kind of open staircases, and then the handrail becomes even like a kind of a flower in the entrance hall. Now it's your turn.
I think I have to be much faster.
Sorry.
The next project is not an architectural project, but an exhibition. We had the opportunity in 2016 to make an installation in the Architekturgalerie Berlin. And we took that opportunity to reflect the topic of the garden, as Elli just introduced, developing the idea. We finally said, okay, let's make a real garden inside, also to turn the outside, to bring the outside to the inside, turn that around. And what was then, in a way, the challenge was that we were not searching for abstraction, but rather kind of the illusion of a perfect environment. So for that, we worked with large printed photographs on the wall, and then of course we had to make the floor waterproof and so on. We brought in earth. We searched for fragments all around Berlin, and then in the end it looked like that. And if you go closer, you cannot say what is kind of built and real and what is image. It just becomes once a perfect illusionistic garden. Then another realized project in that series is the housing complex Steinwies, also in Zurich, also an early project that we won by a competition and then could realize. It consists of 3 houses. This is the biggest one. You can see them here on the urban scheme. It's about an existing villa, a brick villa. It's a listed house, so we had to keep it and refurbish it. Then a smaller one here, we called it Atelier House, and then the large one. And each of those houses has its own kind of reference point in the neighborhood. The existing villa, it's quite a typical one for the site. Then this Atelier House, unfortunately I don't have an image here, is a kind of a proto-modern house, like the Doldetal houses by Marcel Breuer, who are also in the area there. So we said we don't design it, we just take the language of the Neues Bauen and adapt it. In contrast to the large house then, here we were searching for another and specific language, because it's a multi-family house. It's not a villa, but still it's in the center of the plot, because the surrounding trees are protected. So we somehow had to deal with this contribution, and by that we said, okay, we don't go for something that is typical here. We rather we were more interested in something that is related to these trees, to the tree trunks. We were investigating ruins, natural forms, geological formation, like these basalt structures that also have a kind of architectural expression. And by that formal investigation, we developed the volume and the expression of the house, but then also the plan, which is coherent to this volumetric scheme. the plan is following a kind of an inner path. Starting inside here, you have two axes, one directly with the elevator, the other one with the staircase, and then on this path you move to the outside, to say so, and the vanishing point is given by a chimney here in this living hall that has a kind of three orientations. On the side, a loggia, in the axis of the loggia, kitchen, that is a kind of a sideway on this path. You have here another part of the living to that side. And we compared that plan with almost with an English landscape garden, so a kind of a sequence of scenes that open up and then close again. And here just one or two images of the interior, how that works, how this movement is somehow provoked almost by these closed walls. And then here you see the end point with this, the vanishing point with this chimney. So, and that's how it looks today, how it's kind of blending in the site.
It's you, no?
Oh, that's again me. Next topic, next term, performance. The term performance generally refers to the efficiency of a machine, or in the artistic sense, as performance to a creative presentation in the form of a happening. This dual technical and artistic connotation makes the concept particularly intriguing for its application in architecture. In architecture, performance embodies the potential for changeability, adaptability, and through this, the capacity for individuals to appropriate space and its architectural elements. Conceptually, performance has little in common with flexibility. Unlike performance, flexibility refers to the ability, as a quote, ability of adaptive behavior, pliability, and elasticity. Flexibility denotes a response to external pressure. Once the adaptation occurs, the transformation is completed, at least for a certain period. Performance, by contrast, entails transformation from within. These transformations are never final, but rather continuous. The objective of performance is transformation itself. Embedded within the concept of performance is an inherent drive for change, echoing the notion of machine performance. While flexibility is a reaction to economic or functional pressure, performance describes an engagement with pleasure, entertainment, and the enrichment of possibilities. And we also would like to show what we mean by a concrete project.
So there's actually different projects that dealt with this idea of performance or performance. It's actually difficult to translate it into English because in German this connotation between machine and art is much more given than in English. And one of the projects was, for example, that we built with ETH students, like one-to-one models that were somehow movable, and then we invited dancers to explore it. Another one is a project that I'm going to show you now. It's the apartment building in Stampfenbachstraße, but it all started with a mock-up or a kind of a prototype of a house on the ETH terrace. Yeah, one of you, if you know ETH, the Hill building, it's actually that, the architecture department. And we built this prototype on the rooftop in order to test the kind of the feasibility of the constructive feasibility on one hand, but also we wanted to know how people would actually use it. But that's maybe on another note. So that's the, let's say, the prototype that you can see. It consists of different movable elements, a movable wall in the center or movable door, however you want to call it. It's this kind of in the core of the project, and then you have a movable shelf on the side. and then movable lamps also. So it all started with actually a client of us who asked us to build a project, like kind of a solar house project for solar households. And of course, on one hand, you're always challenged by these questions, and you can also question them. For us, the first question was, there is a dominance of the single household all over the planet, probably also in Switzerland. What is the characteristics of living alone? That was the first question. And the second question was also, what is maybe the potential of smallness in architecture, particularly in housing? So referring to the first question, we just found out that, if you look at who is living alone, there is no specific type of human being who lives alone. So you will find students, widows, divorced people, kind of voluntarily living alone people. There is just many different reasons why you would live alone. And so there is not a specific type that you can actually develop for living alone, as you would maybe have done in the 1920s. There were examples of that. And the other thing was also that kind of the idea of smallness could come up with a space that doesn't follow, let's say, the kind of, the order of a bourgeois or a small family house, but is actually in kind of an open vessel that has some loose partitioning that everyone can actually appropriate for himself or herself. Well, I think that was extremely important. So smallness then becomes also a chance for different household models, and this idea of change or performative architecture in this case means that the people living there can appropriate the space. And the reason why we built it on ETH Terrace was actually a small research project that we made with test residents. We invited in total 92 people in different age groups to live there for 1 week and to use this apartment and to see how would they actually inhabit and how would they appropriate the space. That was the question that we raised. So in order to really invite people to move the elements, there is also a lot of, let's say, details. For example, you see the handles in the kitchens, there is lacquer, there is also, you see it in the back, there is this car belt for the lamps, so you could actually throw the lamp like that. So you really have to go on kind of stretch yourself to do that. There is also mirrors on the shelf in order to actually create new perspectives. I think in a rather small household, you need that because otherwise, the gaze is in a way kind of boring with time. Then glass handles on the mirrors to really touch, also that to invite people to touch, so that people also are invited to change. So also, for example, this metal for the sliding wall was also important. So everything you are supposed to touch is somehow marked also with a particular material. And in the back you see those two platforms in the front and in the back. So they create a kind of a start of a furniture, so you can lay the mattress directly on it, or you can also use these Japanese pillows to sit on it to have the right size. You don't have to bring a lot of furniture. You don't need to own much to live in this apartment. That was also an assumption. And here you can see different constellations. You can close the kitchen, or you can leave it open, and so on. And it was very interesting for us actually to see during these 92 weeks that there are really patterns that we can find out, and and you need somehow a kind of a structural change to change. So like, for example, from day to night, people would change, or if they would receive guests, they would change. Men would change less than women. That was also interesting. And so on. So there were slight patterns, not really strong ones, but there were. That's a detail of this rotating wall in the center, so you can see the axis is fixed, and then the wall is rotating. Also here you see the platform with the drawer, that is actually a substitution of another closet, so you can use that. And then here you can see all these movable elements, and for the research we equipped all the movable elements, also including the windows, the fridge, the waste bin, with sensors in order to measure really what is being moved. So it was also very interesting to see in a household what do you touch and what do you actually move. And next to the fridge, actually, the revolving wall was touched the most. Yeah, the fridge was very important. And then we actually built that after that. So there was also some constructive tests because it's really a prototype. And you know, in architecture, every house is a prototype. Whereas, for example, in cars, you always do prototypes in order to test if it really works. So that was our prototype. And then we built it here in Stampfenbachstraße. It was finished 2021. And this is now the floor plan, as you can see it. So the test apartment is the one in the center. Exactly. And so you can see this idea of movement was actually then also translated into the house around the corner. So as you see, actually, it's like a cart house going around the corner. And then this kind of, you know, kind of follows the idea of movement already. But then you have kind of this really moving walls in the center. So you see those two staircases with slight larger apartments to the side and then smaller apartments in the middle. So you have in total around 30 apartments in this house. On this plot, there was already a house, and when we actually substituted the house, we kind of set our new house on the existing cellar and foundation in order to actually kind of save energy, CO2 also. So it stands on these concrete plinths that was already there. And then, since the house then had to be higher and lighter, the timber made a lot of sense. No? So it's a CLT construction, as you can see. And then there is this kind of one apartment going to the garden and one in the roof, and then the regular apartments. And this is this beautiful plan by the timber engineer where you can see it. It's like a puzzle now, all these timber slabs, CLT slabs coming together. And then when you start with movement and performance, it never stops, no? So that's a little detail that we like a lot. So you can see on the left side, it's actually a window, and then you have a mirror, a round mirror that you can actually kind of revolve, or kind of, you know, kind of revolve in front of the window in order to occupy it.
It's like an eclipse.
Yes, thank you. So that's some images of the apartments, how it has been built. It's a full timber, and in the inside there is kind of, you don't see the timber, but it has this quality of a close. The garden. Yes. Another project that is really literally kind of working with the idea of performance is the Swiss Art Award that Grace also mentioned in her introduction. We won this in 2019 and finished it actually only in 2021 because of Corona. And it's a project that, you know, this is the Swiss Art Award is kind of an important event once a year. And they changed the task a little bit, and the task was to propose a large-scale installation in the hall where also art was exhibited, not only architecture, but also art and design, and to make architecture more visible as a discipline among all the different artistic projects. That was the task. And our proposal was to install a huge textile roof in the exhibition hall that wraps around the visitor like almost a second skin, continuously reshaping the space as a backdrop of the whole exhibition. So you can see there is kind of, you can see below there is a kind of a textile suspended from ropes in different axes, and each of these axes are moved by a motor And the control of this movement is done by an algorithm measuring different parameters of human activity, like noise level, number of visitors, speed of their movements, CO2 in the air, etc. So it's somehow coincidental what then comes out of it. So this is this huge this huge hall. So the textile itself was 2,000 square meters, so really super large. And that's our employees actually installing this textile, and it actually was super nice when the installation itself. It looked like a sea, you know. You see the ropes, and then you slowly kind of lifted the textile, and then you have these beautiful moments, almost like Baroque installations, and then from above it's really a skin. It's really very thin and light, no. And you can see the different movements, and then, yes, so these textile roofs became kind of an organ of the visitors being present, and this organ slowly, almost unnoticed, kind of changed during the exhibition. And sometimes it would form, let's say, really architectural forms, sometimes really organic. So we also spoke of canopies and clouds. And this is a nice movie. Maybe, I don't know if Matt can... Matt? Can you press play? Thank you. So you can see that. So you see below the exhibition, and then how the textile is moving. Yes. Okay, let's go to the next one. It's you.
The third project in this group is quite a special one. It's maybe I just go on. It's in the high Alps. It's close to Jungfraujoch. Jungfraujoch is a probably the most famous tourist place in Switzerland in the Alps. It's also a competition we won. It's not yet realized. We still hope that we can do it. Here you see an image of that place with glaciers. There's always snow. It's on, I think, around 3,500 meters above sea level. This is the Sphinx. It's a scientific and weather station. And then on the east ridge, there is an existing, sorry, I have quickly to check that, a directional beam system, also kind of an old infrastructure for telecommunication that is not anymore needed. And the Jungfraubahnen, also this tourist company that runs the rail that goes up, there is a rail, crazy. They wanted to transform that station and also reuse it as a touristic facility. And it was a kind of a strange brief because they asked just for kind of view platforms, restaurants, but also an exhibition hall for a special clock, because they think a clock is representing Switzerland. It speaks about Swissness and such like things. And we found that very strange and asked how could we rewrite that program? How could we interpret it? And we said, maybe it's more interesting to think of a house that works as a clockwork, also that the house becomes the clockwork and is not exhibiting a clock. So that's how it looks then. Here another kind of plan or section. I think it's a photo of a tourist information board, and it's just that you see how to what extent it is a kind of a machine or a technical infrastructure that what is in and on that mountains. And we said or thought that this place could be interesting for such a time machine because you are close to the cosmos, to say so. You see always the stars because you have no light pollution and so. You see how the moon races, how the sun goes and so on. So we did a whole research in kind of time machines, to say so. So a lot of clocks, but also these Boule cases, old clocks. And then we developed our own clockwork. It's actually a very basic mechanical clockwork, pendulum, etc. So this is just a scheme of the mechanics. And then actually we had a clockmaker. We contacted a clockmaker who helped us, and he also then built this model. As this is the project in 1:100 as a clockwork that runs. And of course, this was impressive to the client. So it's how you have to do it. There was also a rendering, of course, and then also some animations. So here you see the core of this clockwork with the pendulum. Next to it is then also the weight. And the energy comes from wind, so it's completely energy autark, the building.
One of the issues is that 80% of the days you go there, the weather is bad and you don't see anything. So we thought it might be interesting to have at least a clock inside.
And the interior works then as a kind of a promenade architectural through that clockwork. So normally you have just these kind of wheels, little wheels in a clockwork, and we extruded these wheels to spaces, and then you could walk through these moving wheels. Maybe I go on. So that's just an example of a plan that we showed. Then this was then another model that we did later on. This is in the workshop of the clockmaker. Behind you see him, and this is an impression of that interior. So it was quite wild, but this client was convinced. He thought this could really be exceptional and interesting for him. Yeah. So we come to our last.
Yeah, I think we have to wrap up. So I think maintenance is the last topic, and it goes, or it is about repair and renovation. And we are increasingly engaged in projects that focus on preserving, repairing, and expanding existing buildings. And through this work, we have come to recognize that the regular maintenance would significantly extend the lifespan of a building. Yet it's also interesting that even in Switzerland, maintenance is rarely undertaken. In fact, maintenance and care are not even considered part of architecture's domain, and we always have these discussions that maybe we should actually offer that. Once we finish the building, for example, we could actually also offer the maintenance of it, but that's another discussion. But let's go on to the next project. Just very quickly, that's a renovation of a project that we have done in 2015. It's quite a famous architects for their time. Fleckhardt Häfeli, they've built also in Davos, the famous Schatzalp, if you know it. It's by them. It's a villa built for a family, and the clients who bought it, it's 3 clients actually, they wanted to do a bed and breakfast out of it. And in total, it was about care, of course, kind of repair and care what you found. It's also protected by preservation and heritage. But what was also very interesting is that the garden was something that was destroyed during the 60s to create a parking lot, and part of our engagement was also restoring the garden. That's the floor plan. It's very typical. We did not change it really much. It was about bringing in a new elevator and bringing in new bathrooms and so on, and really taking care of the basic structure as it's protected, but then also creating this new garden. And the old garden that was destroyed had this idea of chambers as in the inside, and we wanted to go on with that or kind of recreate this idea. So from inside, these bathrooms are new, it's kind of set into the space, profiting also from natural lights and kind of creating also certain generosity. And then you have the social rooms. They are still there. We only kind of painted them anew, or kind of looked after the furniture even. That was also nice. We could actually, in this case, also propose furniture, and the client also had some own furniture that they would bring, so it was also a kind of an interior architecture that we could do. And yeah, so these social spaces, they belong now to the hotel, and they are also used for events, but also for breakfast and so on. And yeah, that was a nice endeavor. And what is very particular is also, it used to have a small cinema already in the cellar, because Universal used it to actually show movies. They had rented it before. And one of the clients is also a producer, and he wanted to have a cinema inside. So in the ground floor, in the cellar, which is also, it has a direct entrance with it, a new foyer and a small cinema. That's a kind of a sketch of the garden, which is actually the reason why we won this competition, because the brief was only about the renovation of the house. But when we saw this destroyed garden, we said, hey, it's actually house and garden. It cannot only be the house. And that's what the client liked a lot. So we repaired this plateau, as you can see it here, this kind of meadow, but then also in the back there is a small water basin with the pavilion, which is also then designed by us and refers actually to an existing, to an old structure that had been destroyed. Yeah.
I think the last two projects I will just quickly mention. It's also about heritage, about two listed buildings, not a bit younger, also the Signalhaus is from 1912. And the theater in Winterthur is a building finished in 79 by Georg Krähenbühl, a Swiss architect. It's a very particular architecture, also a bit strange from the outside. It has this kind of monolithic sculptural character, and yeah, you can see that also here. And in the inside, it's then very colorful and also much more structural. So below this kind of heavy roof are these steel constructions. As I said, it's a very particular building in Switzerland, outstanding. Of course, there are also certain influences. I mean, the installations that have this bright colors, you can clearly see Richard Rogers or other international influences. And yeah, our task is, or the task of the project is more or less a technical renovation of the installations on the stage side, but also technical installations like electricity, ventilation, heating, and all that stuff. And in that project, we see ourselves more as lawyers of these listed buildings than as the architects who design. So it's really about keeping it. And In parts, we also do small reconstructions. So this is a model photography of the entrance part. And the last project is a school from the same, more or less from the same time, also finished in the 70s. It's one of the largest schools in Zurich. It's built by Eduard Neuenschwander. He's a kind of a pupil of Alvar Aalto. So he worked in Finland for a long time, and I think we can see that in many parts. For instance, also here. So he was also interested in this kind of almost natural forms, mimetic forms in spaces that are primarily defined by floor and ceiling, like in all these typical Aalto buildings. But then, of course, there are also other influences, like the béton brut, that comes more from Corbusier or others. That's a plan. And we would like to reuse or bring back the original intention of Neuenschwander, that this kind of wide access spaces can also be used for teaching, but also for the free time and so on, which is actually on the current norms and regulations, fire regulations, not possible. And so we start there also with very technical things to bring back the original qualities of the architecture. So this is just hard work, but it's interesting in both cases actually to get in a dialogue with these beautiful pieces that are not designed by us. So that's it. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you so much, Elli and Christian. It's so fantastic to hear and see your work. Maybe I'll start with some of the questions. I'm going to turn it over to all of you because I'm sure you have as well. It seems to me that you, especially in the area of maybe your section on performance, you are inherently, in a sense, critiquing certain aspects of the discipline. For example, one might think about the use, the word performance as being, as you suggested, in contrast to flexibility. Mm-hmm. And flexibility seems to be a response to extrinsic pressures, mm-hmm. whereas what you like about performance, and I think it's a very powerful way of thinking about it, performance would be driven by the intrinsic nature, mm-hmm. the authority of the architect to recover some kind of way in which the project becomes operationalized, the use of the space. And then that's active, it's dynamic, it's, and this idea of the way it works from within the work itself. But you must be inherently then critiquing, when you pose that setup, and I think that's really interesting for this group to hear about, when you prepare it in those terms, it's partly because you're actually proposing something in response to maybe a condition of the discipline that we need to recover. Maybe, could you say something about that?
I mean, the term flexibility, it's almost in every competition you read that, no? And it's so boring, no? So it means that it has to fit all different aspects of everyone. It can be also changed and so on. And of course, flexibility has also its own right, and I think there is also theory about it. It's totally clear. So what we criticize a lot and want to criticize with the term performance is the fact that the flexibility, is always a kind of an economical solution. So in the end, you make it flexible because economically spoken, of course, you don't know how it will change and so on. So you need to be prepared for future changes and so on. So performance then maybe as an idea or as a thesis is preparing architecture itself to be ready for change. It's a bit more, it's embedded in the DNA of architecture. But I know, I mean, of course, if you go then in the back and look at the theory of flexibility, there is also within that an idea of performance inside. But it's never meant in these competition briefs like that we read, actually. It's always very economically thought. So this idea of performance, it's also a bit, in the end, it's also about looking at architecture in the sense of entertainment, playfulness, joy, which are extremely important aspects that are often forgotten, or overseen, because architecture, and particularly housing, is so much connected to real estate, and that's something that we also criticize. No, I think that's a problem. I mean, of course, real estate has its own right, but architecture and real estate are not the same.
Maybe we could probe that a little bit more, because the housing, the vacancy, no vacancy housing, where you're looking at all the pivoting doors and whatnot, we see maybe the origin of that in the precedent of Stephen Hull, who did that in Fukuoka with his hinge space, void space, big things, and then maybe before that we see that in Maison de Verre Chiro's kind of insertions and there was a question about whether or not that would be replicable at scale, and whether or not that strategy could actually be used in housing, and yet you're able to show it now that you can do it in the context of the restrictions and the challenges of real estate as market-driven conditions. And maybe could you tell us a little bit more how you were able to do that? Because again, in those cases, they were so singular, and they didn't actually take off in ways that you would have imagined.
But also here it is a single project. I mean, we have to say that, and it was only possible because at that moment the right person was responsible in that company, and he was interested in what we do. So it was about many coincidences that made that possible. And we are also not sure if we would suggest to upscale it or to repeat that. Also, it is also for us kind of an experimental house, and as you said, it's also kind of a modern dream. Or there is also, how is this in the Netherlands? This
Rietveld.
The Rietveld house, and I mean, you find many examples, and we just found it triggering to try it again in our time, so and how it could look
and
nowadays.
It makes sense in this solar household. It makes much more sense there because, of course, you live alone. I mean, or as two people together, no. But in larger apartments where you have 3 or 4 inhabitants, it's not that easily possible. No, already there, like you have to kind of negotiate a lot, no, around the spaces. So that's the issue, and therefore in the small apartment, it is actually, it makes much more sense, we thought, because there is an example now in Zurich being built for a larger unit by a colleague of us, and we were wondering if this would work or not.
Okay, I'm going to turn it over to all of you. Questions? I have more to ask of you. We have runners.
Hi, Elli. Hi, Christian. Thank you so much for the very interesting talk. I was wondering, do you have any insight into the real-world application of the house with the revolving stuff? I was wondering, do people when the newness wears off, do people actually still move it, or does it swing into one position and then people basically live around these elements? How is that doing on a practical level?
So the nice thing was with this test residence that somehow, it was also for the client quite nice because we had all these kind of ads in the newspaper, so it was quite well known. And then many architects moved inside, so that's also nice for us. And
that's
they like
always what happens with our projects.
So I have to say this helps. No, they really like it, and there is but we don't. We often actually show the house to guests and so on. And there is, for example, one Spanish couple. They are really very generous because they show it all the time. And they have blocked I think they have blocked one shelf, which is also fine, I think. It's possible to block it. I mean, you can also change it afterwards. Also because this idea of movement was not never an idea of a fast movement. It was an idea of a slow movement. If you want to change, you can. It's a possibility that you can take if you want. But it's not, even if you put it in a certain position, you can walk around it. It doesn't block so much, no. So I think that's a nice thing. It's an invitation to change. But if you don't want to change, it's also okay. So it was never like because we also looked at these modern buildings in the 1950s, like the Jacques Tati movies, also where you create dependencies. No, you have to do first this, and then it becomes ridiculous. No. And that we wanted to avoid. We wanted to have actually a very, kind of a generous idea of movability or flexibility that people really use and enjoy.
And the generosity is really created by the offer and the option and the possibility to adapt, but you don't have to do it. It's like Elli said somewhere, we love doors, and I think it's a bit the same. We also make a door where you actually don't need a door, but the door is also an offer. You can open or close it, but probably people then have it always open. But still, it's an offer, and I think this kind of freedom of choice is really something that I think, which is great in living, that it is not reduced to the minimum, and that you just need for
that you only survive in an apartment.
Kind of biological survive.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for this amazing lecture. And I was very taken by your statement that entropy should be or can be an architectural device, and that's such an elegant way of saying something that's very, very provocative. I wonder if there's also a flip side to this, which is to say that, Elli, you also have a scholarly background parallel to your architectural practice, and particularly the work of the Milanese architect Cascio Dormignani, which is in many ways the opposite of this, right? This obsessively complex way, actually obsessively precise way of achieving complexity. And how do you, in your work, arbitrate where to position the moments of your intervention between these two kind of approaches? One is kind of entropy, which is ultimately passive and left to chance, and a more activist approach.
Super nice question. Tough one, huh? But it's so I think starting with Gotcha, I think what we learned there is, the idea of moving and moved architecture. Like you walk through this interiors and you have this bodily experience, of how you move, what you see on the movement. And what you experience there, it's a storytelling for him. So it's actually a quote. No, he says, "Walking through apartments means actually telling stories." No, or also he anticipates the movement of the clients in his apartments. I think these complex geometries that we learned there from him, of course, they also influenced our work. Or yes, of course. So we knew actually that it is possible to be that complex. No, also the Stein-Wies project was one of the first where we actually left a 90-degree corner. No, so we started there, and it was quite challenging. We built also huge models, but in a way, this experience with Gotcha also kind of gives, created this consciousness that it will work eventually. And then entropy is, of course, it is the idea of open form is actually really something else, and it comes from this kind of investigation into garden as a topic. And there, this kind of ever moving, the seasonality, if you don't actually maintain, it will kind of, become something else, and so on. This is extremely interesting, but it is another. It's another kind of path, no? And of course they cross. Of course they do, because they both somehow are in movement, no? But one for another reason. And yeah, this idea of entropy, I think that's something. Also, again, going to the Stein-Wies project, for example, for us it was really interesting that there is no real figure from outside, because of course from above in the floor plan you see the figure, the 4 fingers, but when you walk around it, you never perceive the figure of the building. So you only have this kind of fractions of a facade, but you don't get it actually. So it's then again it becomes open to interpretation. No, this idea of free, open form of echo. I think that's super beautiful and allows you also, kind of gives you a kind of a freedom in architecture to develop. In Gaccia's case, it was much more kind of a rigid vessel, and inside it there is a softness and fluidity, which of course is something else. No. So I think you combine 2 things now in your question that for us are not combined, but maybe their effect is similar. Yeah? Thank you.
Hi, Elli. Hi, Christian.
Where are you?
Right here, sorry, in front.
Ah.
I had a question about maybe flexibility and in housing. In Core 4, we're looking at housing, and we're struggling with ideas of, how do we actually create flexibility for now and for the future. Oscar and I are looking at different ways, maybe not moving walls necessarily, but offering that flexibility at a larger scale. In a lot of your housing units, you manage to avoid repetition in plan. You avoid these, rational kind of structural grids. I'm wondering, what is your process to plan making, and how can we afford flexibility on maybe a larger scale?
Mm-hmm. A pencil?
No, I think once more it's really important to say that this performative house, this vacancy house, is not flexible I think in our understanding, because it's really about single households and so on. So what could flexibility mean? We always or normally differentiate between, I think, 3 categories. Also there is a flexibility. A structural flexibility. So, for instance, if you do a skeleton building, then non-load-bearing walls, and so then you can change it, and so this is a kind of flexibility, but not in the everyday. So you have to redo it, and then on the level of the everyday, I'm quite convinced that flexibility is given when you offer. Rooms that you can close, rooms that have not the minimum size, so let's say 16, 18 square meters, then it can be for sleeping, it can be a living, so on. But this is just one thought, but I mean, we had several experiences, and this was somehow the outcome, that open spaces, lofts, and such things are not flexible, because you cannot have different household types in such a part. And so this is on the organizational, everyday level, what we could probably say on flexibility. And then what was the 3rd category? So
there is kind of, it's the structural, it's polyvalence, and it's the literal flexibility. And the literal is it's the closest to this idea of performative house, like the Rietveld house, where you actually have really doors that can change the floor plan. These are the 3 forms of flexibility that people write about. And developing floor plans in housing, it is always a bit, about creating memorable moments. No, kind of it's. I mean, maybe one interesting moment for us was always that, you know, housing and for us, housing is really, let's say, in the core of architecture, and real estate kind of established another kind of housing almost, no, but that is kind of sellable on the market. So we really try to maybe we see its housing as part of architecture, and then you really have to develop it also on architectural topics. So we don't think from the beginning about the single unit or the single, let's say, space, but we think about this kind of development of spaces around a certain plot, no?
I think there is another dimension also of flexibility, maybe more on the urban scale or on the scale of the city. I think real estate, or what we observe in Switzerland, is that they all do the same because they think, oh, that's what the market wants, and so, and then you have at the end only houses with 2 or 3 room apartments, and you could also say that not every house has to offer everything, but that you just rather make specific houses, and then you somehow serve a specific group in society, and then another house serves another group. So this is also, and they can move. If you have kids, you go there. If you don't have kids, you go there. And so this is also could also be an understanding of flexibility. But normally we are confronted that every house have to offer everything, and I think this is a bit stupid.
I don't want to call it, but I just want to make one other comment about that, because it seems like one of the other hallmarks of your housing, to me, is that you're always looking at light from multiple sides, which is actually very engaging and is inherently driving a kind of flexibility of use, which actually we don't see in the single loaded corridor model or the double loaded, or the requirement for double egress. So it's also really interesting because you have a lot of floor through apartments and exposure on multiple sides, which is, again, like that's not even a part of like the U.S. Real estate driven market. So I think it's another form of flexibility that I think is like you're driving it through the apertures, which I think is really interesting. I think we saw another question up there.
Okay. I have a question regarding the performative apartment again. You said a phrase that was super beautiful. That was that you were seeking to create a space that people could enjoy it without having much. In a way, the apartment was providing that. And that sense of living with less instead of living with more, yes. I think that it's great. And I'm wondering if you apply that idea to other projects, and it's something that you are kind of like seeking constantly, or yeah, I'm just curious about that phrase.
No, because in this, it came along with this idea of smallness. No, if you move in such a small apartment, you probably won't stay for such a long time firsthand. It's more a transitory phase in your life. That's what we thought, and it would be interesting then that you would actually move in with your luggage somehow. No, that was also an idea. Of course, you can also have more. No, there is also kind of storage space under the platform and so on. But it had a lot to do with this idea of smallness, where we thought, maybe it's it's the apartment is already almost furnished. No, you only need a carpet, a table. That's all you need. No.
Well, I think it's also the question was if you also are interested in general, or if you investigate that in other questions. And I think I would say yes. I think sufficiency is crucial. Also, when we talk about sustainable development and so on, I believe more in sufficiency than in efficiency. I think it's more about becoming sufficient. And yes, I think we do that also in other projects, but then it looks different, of course. So this is really a specific case.
We have a question for time for one more question.
Thank you for an amazing lecture.
Thank you.
I was really curious about a larger question about housing and typologies. Currently, do you see any trends in the way that competition briefs are asking for the housing typology, whether it's where you are practicing or globally? And how do you see it sort of evolving over the next 20, 30 years as climate changes, as family types change and birthing rates and everything like that?
That's now a very big question.
I mean, I think part of the response is really that, flexibility in all the briefs even more important because we don't know what the future will bring, no? So this huge uncertainty that we are facing is then actually reflected in the term flexibility. So it should be somehow, I'm really open to different things, but then the risk is always that it becomes very, very generic, no? So one of the questions we always have is how do we achieve a specific solution that allows for a certain generosity, no? Kind of the specific within the generic. That's something that I find very interesting. So on one hand, it has to be open to different life forms. For example, we try to avoid the children's bedroom, for example. No, you always have in this petit bourgeois housing, you have the two children bedrooms and then the parent bedroom and so on. But then it's really fixed for a certain way of living. But if you do it more generous, you can also use the living room as a bedroom. No, that we also did that. So why not? No, I think that could help a lot. But in general, no, of course, no, it's all the briefs are about kind of ecological and social change. It's always the question for us, how honest are these questions formulated by the clients? Because if we then challenge them back, they challenge us, and then we challenge them back in the competition, and then a boring project wins, where these questions are not even answered. We are also then also disappointed.
There's just a lot of greenwashing. So then, if you challenge it, then you fail very often. Maybe what is I think you ask for kind of global trends or trends in Switzerland, Europe. I mean, global is maybe a bit too big word for us. I think what is really upcoming is reuse and also reuse of existing structures. So a project that is right now ongoing is the transformation of an office building into housing. So, such like things are kind of contemporary and ongoing.
Yeah, we almost showed it, but then we took it out because of time.
What a pity.
No, but then, of course, for example, in this case, we even make sure that the housing is only temporarily installed. So you can take it again away if you don't need it. So we see the skeleton structure from the 1960s as a shelf that can be used differently. But I I think the existing building stock is of course now the topic. How to deal with that, how to maintain it, how to keep it, and to renovate it and transform it.
Thank you very much for joining us for this panel.
Thank you.
For the questions.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much.